All right, section 1.8, we're going to talk about inverse functions. Okay, so if we define what inverse functions are basically defined as if I take the composition in both directions, f of g of x and g of f of x, and both of those things turn out to be x, then that tells me that the functions f and g are inverses of each other. Okay? And when we talk about inverse functions, we've got this notation down here where we show f inverse by using almost what looks like a -1 exponent. Now it's not an exponent, it's just a notation, it's a symbol. Okay? And we read that as f inverse. Okay? So when I take the composition of f and f inverse, I'm going to get x. And if I take the composition of f inverse and f of x, then I'm still going to get x. Okay? And the domain of f becomes the range of f inverse. So when I have inverse functions, the domains and ranges switch. So the domain of the function becomes the range of the inverse, and the range of the function becomes the domain of the inverse. So the key thing to remember there is when you're talking about inverse functions is that the domain and range will switch out when I go from one to the other. Okay? So here we want to show that f of x and g of x are inverses of each other. So the first thing is to evaluate f of g of x, which means I'm going to be taking out the x in f and replacing it with the function g. And when I simplify, my 3's will divide out. I have x minus 2 plus 2, and it simplifies to just x. So f of g of x is equal to x. So now we go over and we evaluate g of f of x. So 3x plus 2 minus 2 divided by 3. I'm replacing the x in g with the whole function from f. And when I simplify that, the 2's subtract out. I have 3x divided by 3, which leaves me with just x. Okay. Which tells me that f and g are inverses of each other. Okay. So therefore, f of x and g of x are inverse functions. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could change my g of x to be f inverse of x, okay, using that inverse notation. Now, when it comes to finding the inverse, okay, it's a very simple process. Remember at the beginning, I said when we've got inverse functions, the domain and ranges switch. Okay, so think about which variables represent domain and range. Okay, so what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the f of x and we're going to replace it with y, so that it goes back to an equation y equals 7x minus 5. And since when I have inverse functions, the domain and range swap, that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to switch x and y. Okay, so that's going to be the first thing we do. Once we've got it, we switch x and y. So it's going to be x equals 7y minus 5. Okay. The next thing is going to be then to solve for y. Okay, solve for y. So we'd have x plus 5 equals 7y. So I'd have x plus 5 divided by 7 equals y. Okay? So I know now that this is the inverse of f of x. So to show that, I'm going to go back to my function, my inverse notation, and say that f inverse of x is x plus 5 divided by 7. Okay? And there is my inverse function. Okay? So let's try another one, a little bit different. F of x equals x cubed plus 1. So again, we're going to replace f of x with y. Then we're going to switch x and y. And once we switch x and y, then it's just a matter of solving for y. We want to get the y by itself so that it's in what we call that function form. So we'll have x minus 1 equals y cubed. So to get rid of the cubed, I would take the cube root of both sides, and the cube root of y cubed would just be y. Okay, so this is my inverse. So therefore, f inverse of x is equal to the cube root of x minus 1. So here's our inverse function for f of x being x cubed plus 1. Okay. So see if you can find the inverse here. Take a minute, pause it, see if you can find the inverse of f. All right, so we're going to switch f of x to y. We're going to change that out. And then we're going to switch places with x and y. And now it's just a matter of solving for y. So x minus 4 equals 5 divided by y. So that would give me y equals 5 divided by x minus 4. Okay. Which means that f inverse of x is the function 5 divided by x minus 4. And if we were thinking about domains, what would the domain of this function be? Okay. Well, we can't let x be 4, so we'd have negative infinity to 4, and union that with 4 to infinity, because 4 would give us a 0 in our denominator. Okay, good. All right, last thing is if we think about the graphs of inverse functions, okay, we talked about, remember I said the domain and range switch, so really the x's and y's are switching. So if I have the point AB that's on the original function, then I'll have the point BA on the inverse. The x's and y's just switch, which means that any function and its inverse are always going to be a reflection in the identity line, which is the y equals x. Okay? So if we look at the bottom here, and we look at this function f that consists of some line segments. Okay? So let's just kind of make a little sketch here. Draw a little coordinate plane. And we've got a segment from negative 2, 2 that goes to negative 1, 0. That's down here. Okay. So there's our segment. And a second one that goes from negative 1, 0 to 1, 2. Okay. So there's our function. Okay. So that's our function f in white. Okay. We want to graph the inverse. Okay. So we'll change colors here. So the inverse would switch our x's and y's. Okay. So this point over here that was at negative 2, 2, okay, on the inverse it's going to be at 2, negative 2. This point down here that was negative 1, 0, on the inverse is going to be 0, negative 1. So 2, negative 2 is over here, 0, 1. Okay. And instead of having the point 1, 2, I'm now going to have the point 2, 1. And this graph in pink here is going to be f inverse. Okay. So notice that if we were to look at that line of y equals x, that line y equals x would kind of squeeze through the middle right there. Notice it's just like a mirror image around that y. The x's and the y's all change places. So if I know a graph of a function and I want to graph its inverse, I just need to take the domain and range and switch them. Switch the x and y's around to get the new set of points. Okay? All right, so I would like you to try and do these three. Okay? First thing is I want you to show that f of x and g of x are inverses of each other. Okay? Number 2, I want you to find the inverse of f. And then in 3, I just want you to write in your own words an explanation if you were to tell somebody how to find the inverse or how to determine if two functions are inverses. How would you explain that? What does it mean to do to show that two functions are inverses of each other? Okay. And I would also like you to explain how to find the inverse of a function. Okay. So how to find the inverse of function. So 4 things. Show that f and g are inverses. Find the inverse of f of x. Explain how to determine if two functions are inverses, and a brief explanation on how to find the inverse of a function. Okay, so we'll look at those and we'll talk about those in class tomorrow after we do our work keys quiz. So see you then. Thanks.